Hi, this is Greg Thomas, and welcome to the Welsh American Channel. A number of Welsh Americans were signers of the United States Declaration of Independence, and we will give a brief biography of every one of them. In this video, we will begin to discuss the remarkable Thomas Jefferson, who was not only a signer of the document, but its primary author. Here in Part 1, we will discuss Jefferson's background and early life. In Part 2, we will discuss his enormous personal accomplishments. Thomas Jefferson's writings and promotion of human rights included an emphasis on freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion. He helped to inspire the American Revolution and eventually the success of the American Revolutionary War. Ultimately, his writings also led to American independence, the written Constitution of the United States, and the establishment of the United States as a sovereign and free nation. Thomas Jefferson was born on April 13, 1743, at the family's Shadwell plantation in the British colony of Virginia. He was the third of 10 children. His father, Peter Jefferson, was a planter, an acclaimed surveyor who died when Jefferson was only 14. His mother was Jane Randolph, who was born near London, England, and descended from the gentry of England and Scotland. The Randolph family became a respected and influential Virginia family. So how about the Jefferson side of the family? Peter Jefferson was the son of Captain Thomas Jefferson, born on December 7, 1679. His father, Peter's grandfather, was Thomas Jefferson Sr., born between 1640 and 1658 in the British West Indies. Going back another generation, the documented lineage becomes very murky. Peter's great-grandfather was either a man named Samuel Jefferson, born in 1607 in the village of Pedestree, England, or perhaps a man named John Jefferson, who arrived in America in 1619 aboard the ship Bonahora. Which man was Jefferson Sr.'s father is still disputed. Yet Peter Jefferson knew that he had ancient Welsh lineage. It was not unusual for many of the Welsh in the 15th and 16th centuries to migrate to England for greater opportunities. There was deep poverty in Wales, and it was virtually impossible to own your own land or provide for your family. After a few generations of living in England, these Welsh migrants are considered by modern historians to be English. We have already seen this in the lives of Bunton Gwinnett, Roger Williams, and Captain of the Mayflower Christopher Jones, whose ancient Welsh roots are neglected by historians because their immediate ancestors had lived in England. This is also true of the Jeffersons. But you cannot ignore the rich heritage of 25 or more previous generations because the last few lived somewhere else before coming to the New World. Let's look at the facts that we can know. In the 1750s, Peter Jefferson, father of the future President Thomas Jefferson, established a plantation on the south side of the James River at the Horseshoe Bend, located across from the new Albemarle County Courthouse at Scott's Ferry. There Jefferson acquired over 2,000 valuable acres consisting of both high and low ground. He named his farm Snowdon, obviously after the family's previous ancient homeland in Wales. When Peter Jefferson died on August 17, 1757, he owned 2 plantations, and his estate was divided between his sons. The first was Shadwell, near the Rivanna River, where he made his home, and the second was the distant plantation he named Snowdon. Let's use some common sense here. Peter Jefferson obviously named his plantations after the birthplaces of his treasured family. The one named Shadwell was named after the birth location of his beloved wife Jane in Shadwell, England. His second plantation was named after the birthplace of his Welsh Jefferson ancestors who lived near Mount Snowdon. When Peter's eldest son, Thomas Jefferson, came of age, he chose Shadwell as his own property. Near there, he would eventually build Monticello. As a result, his much younger brother, Randolph Jefferson, inherited Snowdon. Thomas Jefferson himself wrote in his unfinished autobiography, quote, "The tradition in my father's family was that their ancestor came to this country from Wales and from near the mountain of Snowdon, the highest in Great Britain. I noted once a case from Wales in the law reports where a person of our name was either," and the autobiography has PL period or DEF period, perhaps he meant that as a shortened way of saying plaintiff or defendant, "and one of the same name was secretary to the Virginia Company." Jefferson continues, "These are the only instances in which I have met with the name in that country. I have found it in our early records, but the first particular information I have of any ancestor was my grandfather." End of quote. And then he goes on to discuss his grandfather's lands in Virginia. Let's not treat both Peter and Thomas Jefferson's words or actions lightly or as a family myth. Thomas Jefferson maintained dictionaries in a number of other languages in his library, including a Welsh dictionary. Thomas Jefferson's well-known riding horse was named Caraticus, a first-century chieftain of the British Catevallauni tribe. Though not located in Wales proper, they were one of the kingdoms of the native British Celts who fought against the Romans. Let's please stop treating educated people like they're too stupid to know their own roots. Before his death, Peter Jefferson created the Fry-Jefferson map in collaboration with Joshua Fry in 1757. It accurately charted the Allegheny Mountains for the first time and showed the route of, quote, "the great road from the Yadkin River through Virginia to Philadelphia distant 455 miles, end of quote. This would later come to be known as the Great Wagon Road. Thomas Jefferson began his education together with the Randolph children at Tuckahoe, the Randolph family plantation, under the guidance of tutors. Thomas's father Peter entered Thomas into an English school at age 5. By 1752, at age 9, he attended a local school run by a Scottish Presbyterian minister and also began studying the natural world, which he grew to love. At this time, he began studying Latin, Greek, and French, while learning to ride horses as well. He was taught from 1758 to 1760 by the Anglican cleric James Murray, where he studied history, science, and the classics, while boarding with Murray's family. During the 2 years Jefferson was with the Murray family, he traveled to Williamsburg and was a guest of Colonel John Dandridge, father of Martha Washington. In Williamsburg, the young Jefferson met and came to admire Patrick Henry, 8 years his senior, and they shared a common interest in violin playing. Thomas Jefferson entered the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia in 1761 at age 16, and he studied mathematics, metaphysics, and philosophy with William Small. Under Small's supervision, Jefferson encountered the ideas of the British philosophers, including John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Sir Isaac Newton. Small introduced Jefferson to George Wythe and Francis Feuquieres. Small, Wythe, and Feuquieres recognized Jefferson as a man of unique ability and included him in their inner circle. Jefferson became a regular member of their Friday dinner parties where politics and philosophy were discussed. Jefferson later wrote that while there, he, quote, heard more common good sense, more rational and philosophical conversations than in all the rest of my life, end of quote. In his second year, regretting that he felt he had wasted away time and money in his first year, he committed himself to studying 15 hours a day. Jefferson improved his French and Greek and his skill at the violin. He graduated 2 years after starting at William and Mary in 1762. He studied law under Wythe's guidance to obtain his law license while working as a law clerk in his office. Jefferson was well read in a broad variety of subjects, which, along with law and philosophy, included history, natural law, natural religion, ethics, science, and agriculture. Wyeth was so impressed with Jefferson that he later bequeathed his entire library to him. In July of 1765, Jefferson's sister Martha married his close friend and college companion Dabney Carr, which greatly pleased Jefferson. In October of that year, however, Jefferson mourned his sister Jane's unexpected death at age 25. He even wrote a farewell epitaph for her in Latin. Jefferson was admitted to the Virginia bar in 1767 and lived with his mother at Shadwell. He represented Albemarle County as a delegate in the Virginia House of Burgesses from 1769 until 1775. He pursued reforms to slavery, including writing and sponsoring legislation in 1769 that would strip power away from the royal governor and courts and instead provide the masters of slaves the discretion to emancipate them at will. Jefferson persuaded his cousin Richard Bland to spearhead the legislation's passage, but it faced strong opposition in a state whose economy was largely agrarian and had many slaves. Jefferson also took 7 cases of freedom-seeking slaves. He even waived his fee for one. In court, Jefferson invoked natural law, arguing, quote, "Everyone comes into the world with a right to his own person and using it at his own will. This is what is called personal liberty, and is given him by the author of nature, because it is necessary for his own sustenance." End of quote. The judge cut him off and ruled against his client. As a consolation, Jefferson gave his client some money, which may have been used to aid his escape shortly thereafter. However, Jefferson's underlying intellectual argument that all people were entitled by their Creator to what he labeled a natural right to liberty is one he would later incorporate as he set about authoring the Declaration of Independence. In 1768, Jefferson began constructing his primary residence, Monticello, whose name in Italian means little mountain. It was located on a hilltop overlooking his 5,000-acre plantation. He spent most of his adult life designing Monticello as the architect and was quoted as saying, "Architecture is my delight, and putting up and pulling down one of my favorite amusements." Construction was done mostly by local masons and carpenters assisted by Jefferson's slaves. Turning Monticello into a neoclassical masterwork in the Palladian style was his ongoing life project. On January 1st, 1772, Jefferson married his third cousin, Martha Wales Skelton, the 23-year-old wealthy widow of Bathurst Skelton. He died aged 24 on September 30th, 1768, in an accident before his son's first birthday. Sadly, the young boy himself would also die in 1771. Martha was a frequent hostess for Jefferson and managed the large household. Biographer Dumas Malone described the marriage as the happiest period in Jefferson's life. During their 10 years of marriage, Martha had 6 children. Unfortunately, only 2 survived adulthood. These were Martha, nicknamed Patsy, and Mary, nicknamed Polly. Martha's father, John Wales, died in 1773, and the couple inherited 135 slaves, 11,000 acres, and the estate's debts. The debts took Jefferson years to pay off, contributing to his constant financial problems. Jefferson lived in a planter economy which was largely dependent upon slavery, and as a wealthy landholder, he used slave labor for his household, his plantation, and workshops. He first recorded his slaveholding in 1774, when he counted 41 enslaved people. But over his lifetime, he owned about 600 slaves. He inherited about 175 people, while most of the remainder were people born on his plantations. Approximately 100 slaves lived at Monticello at any given time. A revolution was in the making. The British Parliament passed the Intolerable Acts in 1774. These were a series of punitive laws passed by the British Parliament after the Boston Tea Party. The laws aimed to punish Massachusetts colonists for their defiance in the Tea Party protest of the Tea Act. Jefferson wrote a resolution calling for a day of fasting and prayer in protest, and as a boycott of all British goods. Jefferson's resolution was later expanded into a summary view of the rights of British America, in which he argued that people have the right to govern themselves. At this time, he retired from legal practice. By 1775 and the age of 33, Jefferson was one of the youngest delegates to the Second Continental Congress at the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War, where a formal Declaration of Independence from Britain was overwhelmingly favored by the delegates. Jefferson was inspired by the Enlightenment ideals of the sanctity of the individual and the writings of John Locke and Baron Montesquieu. Jefferson connected with John Adams, a Continental Congress delegate from Massachusetts and an emerging leader in the Congress. They became close friends, and Adams supported Jefferson's appointment to the Committee of Five, which was charged by the Congress with authoring a Declaration of Independence. The five included Adams, Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin from Philadelphia, Robert R. Livingston from New York, and Roger Sherman from Connecticut. The committee initially thought that Adams should write the document, but Adams persuaded the committee to choose Jefferson. Adams gave these as his reasons, and I'll quote him. "Reason first, you are a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to appear at the head of this business." Adams continued. "Reason second, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. You are very much otherwise. Reason third, you can write 10 times better than I can." End of quote. Jefferson consulted with his fellow committee members over the next 17 days, but he mostly wrote the Declaration of Independence in isolation between June 11th and 28, 1776. From the second floor of a 3-story Georgian-style home he was renting at 700 Market Street in Center City, Philadelphia. In authoring the Declaration, Jefferson drew considerably on his own proposed draft of the Virginia Constitution, George Mason's draft of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and from other sources. Other committee members made some changes, and the final draft was presented to Congress on June 28, 1776. The Declaration was introduced on Friday, June 28th, and Congress began debate over its contents on Monday, July 1st, resulting in the removal of roughly a fourth of Jefferson's original draft, including a passage he authored that was critical of King George III and an anti-slavery clause which criticized King George III for importing slavery to the colonies. Jefferson resented the changes made by Congress, but he did not speak publicly about the revisions. On July 4, 1776, the Congress ratified the Declaration, and delegates signed it on August 2nd. In so doing, the delegates were knowingly committing an act of high treason against the Crown, which was deemed the most serious criminal offense and was punishable by possible torture and death. Jefferson's preamble is regarded as an enduring statement on individual and human rights, and the phrase, "all men are created equal," has been called one of the best-known sentences in the English language. The Declaration of Independence, historian Joseph Ellis wrote in 2008, represents the most potent and consequential words in American history. End of quote. At the start of the Revolution in Virginia, Jefferson was named commander of the Albemarle County Militia on September 26, 1775. He was then elected to the Virginia House of Delegates for Albemarle County in September 1776, when finalizing the state constitution was a priority. For nearly 3 years, he assisted with the Constitution and was especially proud of his bill for establishing religious freedom, which prohibited state support of religious institutions or enforcement of religious doctrine. The bill failed to pass, as did his legislation to disestablish the Anglican Church, but both were later revived by James Madison. In time, Jefferson's views would be accepted. In 1778, Jefferson was given the task of revising Virginia's state laws. He drafted 126 bills in 3 years, including laws to streamline the judicial system. He proposed statutes that provided for general education, which he considered the basis of Republican government. Jefferson was also concerned that Virginia's powerful landed gentry were becoming a hereditary aristocracy, and he took the lead in abolishing what he called feudal and unnatural distinctions. For example, he targeted laws such as primogeniture, by which a deceased landowner's oldest son was vested with all land ownership and power. Jefferson was elected governor for 1-year terms in 1779 and 1780. He transferred the state capital from Williamsburg to Richmond and introduced additional measures for public education, religious freedom, and inheritance. During the Revolutionary War, British General Benedict Arnold invaded Virginia in 1781 and attacked Richmond. Jefferson escaped Richmond just ahead of the British forces, which destroyed the city. He sent emergency dispatches to Colonel Sampson Matthews and other commanders in an attempt to repel Arnold's forces. British General Charles Cornwallis dispatched a cavalry force to capture Jefferson at Monticello, but Jefferson escaped to Poplar Forest, his smaller plantation to the west. When the General Assembly reconvened in June of 1781, it conducted an inquiry into Jefferson's actions during this time, which eventually concluded that Jefferson had acted with honor, but he was not reelected as governor. His wife Martha suffered from ill health, including diabetes. The frequent childbirth further weakened her. Her mother had died young, and Martha lived with 2 stepmothers as a girl. A few months after the birth of her last child, she died on September 6, 1782, with Jefferson at her bedside. Shortly before her death, Martha made Jefferson promise never to marry again, telling him that she could not bear to have another mother raise her children. Jefferson was grief-stricken by her death, nearly to the point of exhaustion. He emerged after 3 weeks, taking long, rambling rides on secluded roads with his daughter Martha, and by her description, she stated that she was, quote, a solitary witness to many violent bursts of grief, end of quote. A few years later, in response to a French diplomat's inquiry about the United States, Jefferson organized his responses in a book, Notes on the State of Virginia, 1785. He compiled the book over 5 years, including reviews of scientific knowledge, Virginia's history, politics, laws, culture, and geography. The book explores what constitutes a good society using Virginia as a model. Jefferson included extensive data about the state's natural resources and economy and wrote at length about slavery and its negative effects. Jefferson was appointed a Virginia delegate to the Congress of the Confederation, organized following the victory of the Revolutionary War and the peace treaty with Great Britain in 1783. He was a member of the committee setting foreign exchange rates and recommended an American currency based on the decimal system which was adopted. In the Congress's 1783 to 1784 session, Jefferson acted as chairman of committees to establish a viable system of government for the new republic and to propose a policy for the settlement of Western territories. He was the principal author of the Land Ordinance of 1784, whereby Virginia ceded to the national government the vast area that it claimed northwest of the Ohio River. Jefferson insisted that this territory should not be used as colonial territory by any of the 13 states, but that it should be divided into sections that could become future states. He plotted borders for 9 new states in their initial stages and wrote an ordinance banning slavery in all the nation's territories. Congress made extensive revisions and rejected the ban on slavery. On May 7, 1784, Jefferson was appointed by the Congress of the Confederation to join Benjamin Franklin and John Adams in Paris. With his young daughter Patsy and 2 servants, he departed in July of 1784, arriving in Paris the next month. Less than a year later, he was assigned the additional duty of succeeding Franklin as minister to France. During his 5 years in Paris, Jefferson played a leading role in shaping U.S. foreign policy. During the summer of 1786, Jefferson arrived in London to meet with John Adams, the United States ambassador to Britain. Adams had official access to George III and arranged a meeting between Jefferson and the king. Jefferson later described the king's reception of the men as ungracious. According to Adams' grandson, George III turned his back on both Adams and Jefferson in a gesture of public insult. Jefferson returned to France in August. While in France, Jefferson became a regular companion of the Marquis de Lafayette, a French hero of the American Revolutionary War, and Jefferson used his influence to procure trade agreements with France. As the French Revolution began, he allowed his Paris residence to be used for meetings by Lafayette and other Republicans. He was in Paris during the storming of the Bastille and consulted with Lafayette while the latter drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Unable to attend the 1787 Constitutional Convention because of his service in France, Jefferson supported the Constitution, but desired the addition of the promised Bill of Rights, which was added soon afterward. Jefferson left Paris for America in September of 1789, intending to return to his home soon. However, President George Washington appointed him the country's first Secretary of State, forcing him to remain in the nation's capital. As we conclude part 1 of this series, I would like to make a few comments about Jefferson, the man. Jefferson was a reserved person by nature and spoke in a very soft voice. He was never considered eloquent in speech and gave very few public speeches in his career. By today's definition, we would not say he had charismatic leadership, but those who spent time with him found his conversations and personality engaging. One of his earliest recognized talents was skillful writing and prose. In his lifetime, Jefferson wrote over 18,000 letters. This talent would serve him well throughout his life. In April of 1962, U.S. President John F. Kennedy was speaking at a White House dinner given to honor Nobel Prize winners throughout the Western Hemisphere. Kennedy looked out over the distinguished guest and stated that they were, quote, the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge that has ever been gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. In part 2 of this series, we will look at Thomas Jefferson as the country's first United States Secretary of State, Vice President of the United States, President of the United States, and his retirement years. Stay tuned to learn even more about this extraordinary Welsh American leader. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel or give us a like, and please feel free to make any comments below. If you would like to see more biographies of leading Welsh Americans, then give us a like. And if you have an individual you would like us to showcase, let me know in the comments below. This is Greg Thomas saying Hwyl am nawr. Bye for now.